Aliens warned her about humans, but he touched her soul asterisk the first time Zara saw him. She knew her world was about to change forever. Standing in the pristine white corridors of the Terran diplomatic station, she watched as the transport pods' doors hissed open, releasing a figure unlike anything she had ever encountered. Kale stepped onto human territory with the fluid grace of water flowing over stone. His skin held the deep blue-silver hue of starlight. His eyes gleamed like twin galaxies in the station's artificial lighting. He was tall, nearly 7 feet, with an elegant frame that spoke of a species evolved under different gravitational forces. When he moved, it was with a dancer's precision, each step calculated yet natural. Zara felt her breath catch in her throat. As Earth's youngest senior diplomat, she had trained for this moment for years. First contact with the Arcturus Coalition was supposed to be the crowning achievement of her career. She had studied their language, their customs, their social structures. What she had not prepared for was the way her heart would skip when his alien gaze found hers across the reception hall. "Ambassador Kale," she said, stepping forward with practiced diplomatic composure, "welcome to the Terran station. I am Zara Martinez, your assigned liaison." His response came in perfectly accented English, though his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in her chest. "The honor is mine, Ambassador Martinez. Though I must confess, my presence here brings more than diplomatic courtesy." Before Zara could ask what he meant, Kale's expression shifted. The polite diplomatic mask fell away, revealing something urgent and deeply troubled. He glanced around the reception hall, noting the human officials and security personnel positioned throughout the space. "We need to speak privately," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "What I have to tell you cannot wait for formal proceedings." Against every protocol she had ever learned, Zara found herself nodding. There was something in his manner, a gravity that transcended diplomatic games. She led him through a series of corridors to her private office, her heart racing with each step. Once the door sealed behind them, Kale seemed to transform. The controlled ambassador gave way to someone more raw, more real. He paced to the window overlooking Earth's blue, marble hanging in space, his hands clasped behind his back. "Your people call this first contact," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "But for my people, this is something far more dangerous. I was sent here to warn you, Zara Martinez. To warn you about what we believe humanity truly is." "I don't understand," Zara said. Though something deep in her chest was already responding to the pain in his voice, Kale turned to face her. And in his alien features she saw something achingly familiar: loneliness, fear, and beneath it all, a desperate hope. "My people have studied humanity for decades. We have observed your wars, your passion, your capacity for both creation and destruction. The Arcturus Council believes that humans are too dangerous for galactic society. They think your species lacks the emotional control necessary for peaceful coexistence." "And what do you think?" Zara asked, stepping closer to him. For a moment, Kale's careful composure cracked entirely. "I think they are terrified of something they do not understand. Your capacity for emotion, for connection, it is not weakness. It is power. And power always frightens those who have forgotten how to feel." The space between them seemed to shrink. Zara could see the conflict playing out across his features, the battle between duty and something else entirely. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "They sent me because they believed I would be immune to human influence, because I've never experienced what you call love." "And now?" Zara asked, her own voice trembling. Kale's hand lifted, as if to touch her face, hovering inches from her skin.
"Ow."
"I begin to understand why they were so afraid." The next 3 days passed in a blur of official meetings and diplomatic ceremonies. But underneath the formal proceedings, something electric crackled between Zara and Kale. Every shared glance across conference tables, every brush of fingers, when passing documents, every private moment stolen between sessions only intensified the connection neither of them could deny. On the 4th evening, Zara found herself in the station's observation deck, staring out at the star field beyond. Earth's atmosphere, She had come here to think, to process the impossible situation she found herself in. But her thoughts kept returning to the way Kale's eyes seemed to hold entire galaxies. "The stars look different from here," came his voice from behind her. She had not heard him approach, but somehow she had known he would come. "How so?" she asked, not turning around, afraid that looking at him might break whatever spell was keeping this moment suspended between them. "From my world they are cold. Distant lights, markers for navigation, nothing more." He moved to stand beside her at the great window. "But from here, beside you, they look like possibilities." Zara finally turned to face him. In the dim lighting of the observation deck, his blue-silver skin seemed to glow with its own inner light. "Kale, what are we doing? This goes against everything both our peoples expect from us." "I know," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every instinct of my training tells me to maintain distance, to complete my mission and return home. But every moment I spend near you makes me question everything I thought I knew about connection, about feeling, about what it means to be alive." She reached out then, her fingers tracing the elegant line of his jaw. His skin was warm, warmer than she had expected, and at her touch he closed his eyes, as if the sensation was almost too much to bear. "The message you were sent to deliver," she whispered. "What exactly did your people want you to tell us?" Kale's eyes opened, meeting hers. With painful honesty, that humanity should be quarantined, that your emotional nature makes you unsuitable for integration with galactic civilization. That contact should be severed before your influence spreads to other species. "And what will you tell them when you return?" Instead of answering with words, Kale cupped her face in his hands. His touch was gentle, reverent, as if she were made of something precious and fragile. "I will tell them that they were right to be afraid, but not for the reasons they think." When his lips met hers, it was with a tenderness that spoke of wonder and discovery. The kiss was soft, questioning, and when Zara responded by drawing him closer, she felt something fundamental shift in the space between worlds. This was not just attraction between two individuals, this was the bridge between species. The proof that connection transcended biology. They broke apart slowly, foreheads touching, breathing shared air. Kale's voice was barely audible when he spoke. "My people have a saying, to touch the heart of another is to risk losing yourself entirely. And are you lost?" Zara asked. "Completely," he whispered, and kissed her again. This time there was more urgency, more need. Zara's hands tangled in the strange silk-like texture of his hair, while his arms encircled her waist, pulling her against him. "Ah!" She could feel the rapid beating of his heart, or what served as his heart, against her chest. Proof that whatever biological differences existed between them, the fundamental experience of desire was universal. "We should stop," Kale murmured against her lips, even as his hands traced the curve of her spine. "We should," Zara agreed, making no move to step away instead. She led him to the small alcove off the observation deck, a private space meant for meditation, but which now became their sanctuary. In the soft starlight filtering through the transparent aluminum walls, they explored this new territory between their worlds with gentle hands and whispered words. The emergency alarm that shattered the morning quiet of the diplomatic station brought with it the end of innocence. Zara woke in her quarters, alone but still warm with memories of the previous night, to find her unit flashing with urgent messages. "All diplomatic personnel report to the briefing room immediately," came the voice of Director Harrison, her superior, and the man who had given her this assignment. Priority Alpha situation. When Zara entered the briefing room 20 minutes later, she found it filled with tension thick enough to cut. Harrison stood at the head of the table, his expression grimmer than she had ever seen it. Around the table sat the other members of the diplomatic corps, and at the far end, isolated both physically and symbolically, sat Kale. He looked up when she entered, and in his eyes she saw a pain that matched her own. Something had gone terribly wrong. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison began without preamble, "we have received disturbing intelligence from our deep space monitoring stations. It appears that the Arcturus Coalition has been mobilizing a significant military presence at the edge of our solar system. Zara felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Kale, searching for some sign that this was a misunderstanding, but his expression had become unreadable, the diplomatic mask firmly back in place. Furthermore, Harrison continued, his gaze boring into Zara, we have reason to believe that Ambassador Kale's mission here was not one of goodwill, but rather reconnaissance for what may be a preemptive strike against Earth. The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Zara found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. That's impossible. Kale came here with warnings, not threats, did he? Or Sin's voice was cold. Or did he tell you exactly what you wanted to hear while gathering intelligence about our defenses, our capabilities, our weaknesses? Every eye in the room turned to Kale. For a long moment he said nothing, and Zara felt her heart breaking with each second of silence. Finally he spoke, his voice carefully controlled. The Coalition fleet is indeed positioned at your system's edge, but not for the reasons you assume. Then explain, Harrison demanded. Kale's gaze found Zara's across the table. In his eyes she saw not betrayal, but desperation. My people discovered that I have been ... compromised. My reports back to the Coalition have not contained the warnings they expected. Instead, I have been sending data about human emotional capacity, about the potential for cross-species understanding, about the beauty I have found in your people's capacity for connection. Harrison leaned forward, and they responded by sending a fleet. They responded by declaring me unfit for duty and demanding my immediate return. The fleet is there to ensure I comply. Kale's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And 2. Ensure that any human influence I may have been exposed to does not spread further. A. The implications of his words settled over the room like a shroud. Zara felt tears she could not afford to shed burning behind her eyes. They're going to take you away. More than that, Kale said, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. They intend to classify this entire contact as a failed experiment. Earth will be marked as a quarantine world. No further contact will be permitted. Over my dead body, Zara said, rising from her chair. Zara, sit down, Harrison ordered, but she was already moving toward Kale. No, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I won't let them take you. I won't let them cut us off from the rest of the galaxy because they're afraid of what we might become together. She reached Kale and took his hands in hers, not caring who was watching. His fingers were trembling, she realized. This being who had seemed so composed and controlled was falling apart. There is another way, he said quietly, his eyes locked on hers. But it would require both of us to risk everything. The plan Kale proposed was as dangerous as it was desperate. Hidden in the depths of the Coalition fleet's database was evidence that would change everything, proof that the warnings about humanity were based not on observation, but on centuries-old prejudices and fear. The original contact protocols were established after a conflict between the Coalition and another species, one that had similar emotional patterns to humans. Kale explained as they huddled in Zara's quarters, planning their next move. But that species was destroyed not because of their emotions, but because of their aggression. The Coalition has conflated the two traits, assuming that to feel deeply is to be inherently violent. And you have proof of this? Zara asked her, hands working to reconfigure a standard communication device into something that could penetrate Coalition security. In the restricted archives aboard my transport ship, files that show the true history, the real reasons for the quarantine protocols. Kale watched her work with something approaching. Your people's technical adaptability continues to amaze me. It's not just technical, Zara said, looking up at him. We adapt emotionally too. We learn, we grow, we change. That's what they're really afraid of, not that we're violent, but that we're transformative. The modified communicator came online with a soft chime. Outside, they could see the running lights of Kale's transport ship docked at the station's primary bay. Getting to it would require bypassing station security, accessing restricted Coalition files, and transmitting the evidence to Earth Command before the Coalition fleet arrived to take Kale home. If we're caught, Kale said, his hand covering hers on the device, both our peoples will suffer for it. And if we don't try, Zara replied, both our peoples will suffer anyway. They made their way through the station's service corridors, moving in the shadows between patrol routes that Zara had memorized during her years stationed here. Every step brought them closer to answers, but also closer to a point of no return. The transport ship's interior was unlike anything Zara had ever seen. Organic curves flowed into crystalline structures, and surfaces that looked solid rippled like water under their touch. At the ship's heart lay the data core, a pulsing sphere of light that contained the collected knowledge of Kale's mission. Need you to understand, Kale said as he began accessing the restricted files, that what you're about to see will change how you think about both our species. The holographic display that materialized around them showed star charts, historical records, and video files dating back over 1,000 years. As they watched the true story unfolded, a tale of a coalition so traumatized by one violent encounter that they had systematically eliminated any species, showing strong emotional characteristics, regardless of their actual threat level. 17. Species, Zara whispered, watching the record scroll past. They've quarantined or eliminated 17 species because of this fear. And they would have made humanity the 18th, Kale said, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries of injustice, as they downloaded the evidence. Zara found herself standing closer to Kale, drawn by the gravity of what they were sharing. This was bigger than attraction, bigger than the connection between two individuals. They were holding the key to changing the relationship between entire civilizations. Whatever happens next, she said, turning to face him in the dim light of the data core. I want you to know that meeting you has been the most important thing that has ever happened to me. Kale's response was to pull her into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear at any moment. Ain't you have shown me what it means to truly live, not just exist. Their kiss was fierce, desperate, filled with the knowledge that they might have only moments left together. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, and in Kale's eyes Zara saw a reflection of her own determination.
Ow, we're going to win.
This, she said. Together, he agreed. The sound of docking clamps engaging brought them back to reality. The coalition fleet had arrived. The final confrontation came not with weapons or threats, but with truth laid bare before the representatives of both worlds. In the station's main conference hall, Zara and Kale stood side by side as the evidence they had retrieved played for. An audience that included Director Harrison, Coalition Fleet Commander Thrixus, and delegates from a dozen worlds. The historical records spoke for themselves. Image after image, document after document, all painting a picture of systematic oppression based on fear rather than fact. When the presentation ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Commander Thrixus, a being even taller and more imposing, then Kale spoke first. These records were classified for good reason. The emotional contagion of species like the humans represents a clear and present danger to galactic stability. Emotional contagion? Zara stepped forward, her voice steady. Despite the magnitude of the moment, is that what you call the ability to form genuine connections? To empathize, to love, to grow together rather than apart. You prove my point, Thrixus replied coldly. Already you have compromised one of our finest ambassadors. His reports became increasingly irrational, filled with concepts our people have moved beyond. Have you? Kale's voice cut through the tension. Or have you simply forgotten what it means to be alive? He moved to stand before the coalition commander, and Zara saw him not as the careful diplomat she had first met, but as someone who had found something worth fighting for. I have experienced more growth, more understanding, more pure existence in these past weeks than in all my previous years combined. If that is compromise, then I embrace it willingly. Director Harrison leaned forward. And what do you propose? That we simply ignore the security implications of your personal feelings? Propose, Zara said, taking Kale's hand in full view of everyone present. That we recognize those feelings as the foundation for something unprecedented, not conquest or domination, but genuine partnership between species. Out. The debates that followed lasted for hours. Arguments were made on both sides, fears expressed, possibilities explored, But gradually, as more evidence was presented and more voices joined the discussion, the tide began to turn. It was a junior coalition delegate, barely older than Zara herself, who asked the question that changed everything. If emotional connection is so dangerous, why do we see in these humans not aggression, but the capacity for sacrifice, for growth, for putting the needs of others before their own? The question hung in the air, unanswered by those who had built their policies on fear. In the end, it was not grand gestures or political maneuvering that won the day, but something much simpler. As the formal sessions concluded and delegates began filing out, Zara found herself alone with Kale on the observation deck, where their journey had truly begun. "What happens now?" she asked, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed quite so distant. "Now we build something new," Kale replied, his arms encircling her from behind. "A partnership between our peoples based not on fear, but on the possibility of what we might become together and us." Zara leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Us," he said, his voice warm with promise. "We become the first of many. Proof that love truly can transcend any boundary, any difference, any distance between worlds." As they stood there together, watching Earth turn slowly in the void, both knew that they had become part of something larger than themselves. First chapter in a new story of what was possible when hearts were allowed to touch across the vast spaces between stars. The warning signals had become love songs. The galaxy would never be the same.